Hey guys, it's Kat and I'm back today to do my 1 month 1 palette for April. So if you're new here and you're not sure what this sort of series is all about, it's about grabbing a palette that I've had in my collection for quite some time, focusing on it for a whole month, using it say like 3 to 4 times a week, and giving my thoughts on what I think about the palette after using it as my main palette for a whole month, and also sharing the looks that I created using the palette, and also then I recreate a look at the end. So the makeup that I'm wearing now, I show you how I get that at the very end. It wasn't so much replicating a particular look, it was just a general vibe of how I like to use these sort of green colors in this palette. So the Gemini palette is a limited edition palette. I did hear that it's coming back. I don't know if that's the case, but that's the rumors. And it is a 10 pan eyeshadow palette. The thing that is the most interesting about this is these greens here, and that's why I bought this palette. So it's a palette that's got 2 shimmers. We've got one here, one there, and the rest are mattes. So you've got more of your neutral, well, nude. They're not really neutral. There's some neutral colors in there, some warm colors, back to neutral colors, and then you have these glorious greens. Now, if you know me, I love green eyeshadows, but I love these green eyeshadows. So many people try to recommend sort of like blue tone greens to me and like bright greens, but I really love these murky swampy greens. So I like to call them olive greens, brown greens, mustard greens, and I think that's what makes this palette more and more unique in the sea of greens that are coming out at the moment. I feel like this palette sort of sparked the green eyeshadow trend, but no brand has yet come close to recreating these greens that are done as well as this palette, in my opinion. So there are some coming out. There's one from Gimme Glow Cosmetics that's creating like an olive green inspired 6 pan palette, and those look very similar to these 3 shades, but just like duplicated, so there's 6 shades, but it's missing this mustardy sort of greeny swampy bile color that is actually one of the hidden gems of this palette. So even though I have seen a lot of brands trying to replicate those greens, they're still missing out on this sort of yellow. It's like a murky chartreuse yellow, and it works beautifully blending out these shades and actually making it look like a cohesive look. So I feel like this is still a very unique palette, even though there's more and more coming out with similar olive shades. But if you like these shades, hopefully you got it, or hopefully they restock it and you can pick it up. Even though this palette is from Melt Cosmetics and it's not cheap, it's a 10 pan palette and their shadows are pretty expensive, I do think it's worth it for that little quad alone, because I love this palette. So before I go into the looks that I created and I show you how I used the shades, I do want to say that after this month, I don't have mixed feelings about this palette, because I knew exactly how I felt about this palette when I started using it, because I've used it many times. I do think the quality for the price isn't the best. I do feel like it's a little bit powdery. There's a bit of fallout. The one saving grace, and you'll see it at the end when I demonstrate this look, you can just get a fluffy brush and brush it away. So the fallout doesn't stick to the skin and like ruin your base. You can just swipe it away. So that's one good thing about the fallout, but there is a little bit of fallout. It's that sort of softer formula that you pick up, and it sort of can rain down a little bit if you're not careful. So there's that. Also with the mattes, they can sort of skip on the eye a little bit. It's not a big deal, but if you like those really powdery soft mattes that blend flawlessly on the eye, these aren't those. They do grip to the eye pretty well, but you need to be careful. If you like a really nice even blend, you'll be working at it a little bit. So you'll also see that when I demonstrate the greens at the end. There's just a little bit of patchiness when applying this. So it's not my favorite formula, but once again, I can overlook it because whenever I use these shades, I'm pretty much happy with the look. It's generally really flattering and I really love it. Another letdown of this palette is I hate this shimmer formula. So I will show you some looks that I've created using it, but it is really flaky. It's not very pigmented, and it just is really lackluster for a shimmer, especially from an indie brand that their main draw card is their colors and their formula. This I just hated. I couldn't use it as an inner corner highlight because it didn't give much pigmentation. It was really chunky, had a lot of fallout. It was just a waste of a pan, and that really frustrated me because I think what this palette is missing is a really nice highlight shade that isn't a green, and that one could have been it, but the formula is just subpar. It's not great, and for the price it's not unusable, but I just don't reach for it. This shimmer's a lot better, so if I do swatch this shimmer, it is a lot better, which is great because it's a beautiful green color. You sort of want it to be better, so you can see the difference in the pigmentation there. The green is nice. It's still a little bit chunky, but that shimmer is just, I'd call it a piece of shit. So yeah, the saving grace for this is the color story. So if you like the color story, it's great. I do find that there's almost this green, cool toned half, and there's this sort of neutral, warm tone half. You can use them independently for some color and some smokiness and some green, or you can use this for a more nude, mustardy, warm toned sort of look going on, or you can use them together. So that's one, I think the saving grace for this is the color story, and I can sort of forgive a lot of the flaws for the color story, but is it a perfect formula or a perfect palette? No, it's not. And it becomes quite glaringly obvious when you try to get a variety of looks using this. I started finding towards the end of the month, I wanted to reach for browns and champagnes and colors from other palettes to work with these, or to work with these to get some variation, because if you're using the greens, even though you'll see in the looks there are different colors that you can get depending on if you focus more on this shade, or you focus more on that shade, or if you add in a dark shade, or you can get some slight variations in the look. But overall, the green looks do end up looking quite similar on the eye because the color story is very, very it's like if you just used a red quad. Of course, it's going to start looking very, very repetitive because they're almost gradiating shades of the same color, which I do like and it applies really well, but it can look a little bit repetitive. So there are flaws with this palette, but I still love it. And after using it for a month, I still want to reach for it to wear the greens. I don't really want to reach for it to wear the browns, but the greens, I love it. I love it. So yeah, that's my sort of overall thoughts of the palette. But let's go through the looks that I created this month, and I'll let you know how I felt about the looks, what I struggled with, what I liked, what I didn't like. Let's do it. All right, let's start with the first look. And this is pretty much my signature green look that I will create when I'm reaching for this palette. So this one is similar to what I'm wearing on my eyes today, and I recreate at the end. The only difference is in the one I'm wearing today, I've put a little bit of black to smear out or to blend out the liner a little bit and on my lower lash line, whereas in this photo I didn't use any black. So that's the only difference there. But I used Luna, which is that sort of beige color. That's a really good color to set the crease. And then I used all the greens. So I used the shimmery green goals all over the lid. I blended it out with Mochi, Leo, and Fire OG. So I used all the greens, and I love this look. So I think the lighting on the day that I did this really highlights the greens in the look. Whereas I think if the lighting is a bit more dull, like it is today when I'm filming, it can look a little bit more brown on the eyes, but it's one of those things. These shadows can look really vibrant or quite brown and muted depending on the lighting, which makes it a little bit more interesting. All right, in look number 2, I wanted to go the other side of the palette, and I used Luna, which is once again that sort of beige color. I used Lorelei, which is the mustard orange. This is a really cool color. And I used Cupcake, which is the sort of dark chocolate brown. Now, I mainly wanted to just play with the warm eyeshadows. I think this is a really interesting color palette. The next day, I really tried to play up the shade Gemini, which is that shimmery, shimmery light rose gold color. And it just is really hard to pack on the eye to make it actually look shimmery. It's quite a sheer shade. It's a little bit sparse. It's a little bit chunky, so it's hard to really get on the eye. I did really like this look that I created, but I think I liked it because of the softness of the eye and the wing liner as well, and maybe the glossy peach lip. I think the look overall was quite nice, but the shade Gemini I didn't like it, and I struggled with it. So I also used Polka Dot, which is that warm orangey brown matte shade, and I just used the sort of crease color as well. So this is a very simple look. All right, look number 4, it does not look flattering. What was I doing? But this was me trying to mix both sides. I was trying to mix the sort of neutral side to the green side. So I used Luna, which I usually use to set my base to start with. I used Mochi, which is that really unique sort of bile yellowy green color. I used Fire OG, which is the green next to it, and I also used Cupcake, which is the brown. So all of a sudden, what should be very green shades that I used on my eyes today and looks quite vibrant and green, it did become quite brown when you added in a dark brown. But this shows that you can really mute it down to make it a little bit more sort of not wearable, but a little bit more neutral. And this look was actually quite nice in person. I just don't think I captured it very well on camera. All right, this is what I was talking about, that the shade Lorelei, which is that mustard, can be very striking and unique on its own. In this photo, I am just wearing Lorelei, and I think it's really interesting. I would totally reach for this palette again just to create this simple look, because I think it was a unique color, it was an effective color, and paired with the right lip, like imagine pairing this with a berry lip. I reckon it could look really, really cool. But it also shows that these mattes can stand up on their own. They are quite pigmented. They do blend reasonably nicely if you take your time. I actually really like this look. All right, this is a much more dramatic look. So this was a filming day, as you can possibly tell, and I went heavy-handed on the greens, and also I used the black. That was the main difference here. So I used Luna, I used all the greens, and I used Bonnie, which is the black. So I really hammed up the outer corner, the false lashes, the black, and then I used a gold highlighter on the inner corner, because like I said, this palette doesn't have a great highlighter shade. It's got that beautiful shimmery green, but it's not enough as a highlighter if you want a really bold highlighter. Gemini just doesn't work. That shimmery shade does not look great, so I reached for a gold highlighter to apply this. I think this is a really striking look. You can see how it makes my eyes look really warm, so it really complements brown eyes. I like the look. It was great. It's not a look that I would wear to the shops, but it's a really striking look. I think this was probably my last attempt to really make Gemini work. So I really packed on that shimmery shade, that light rose gold shade. You can see me really trying to get as much pigmentation as possible. And then all I did was I blended it out with Polka Dot, which is that orangey color. So yeah, it was just a basic look, and it wasn't a bad look, but I definitely don't think it's a strong part of this palette at all. Look number 8, I wanted to mix brown with the greens, but I wanted to use a shimmery brown all over the lid. So I reached for a different brown shimmer shade and a different highlight shade. So what's on my lid is not from this palette, and what's in the inner corner is not from this palette, but I blended it out with Leo and Mochi. So I wanted to show that you can actually pair this with browns. Look number 9, this is actually a really beautiful look. This is a mix of Gemini palette and also the Melt Smoke Sessions palette. So the Melt Smoke Sessions palette came out a few months after Gemini, and it mainly has darker shades and mainly shimmers. And these are, once again, greens. It's got some sort of gold greens. It's also got some sort of more icy colored greens. So what I did was I used Fire OG and Mochi to blend out some of the gold greens from that palette. It was a very, very striking look. I wore this to a concert. I really like the look, and you can see that this gold green highlighter shade, these are really missing in the Gemini palette. I would have loved to have seen a mix of Gemini and Smoke Sessions to really create a comprehensive sort of murky, swampy, army, olive green palette. I think it would have been amazing. So you can tell that I was sort of getting sick of just using the Gemini palette because I wanted to experiment with other shimmers. I do like shimmer all over the lid and then, add a lot of dimension using mattes. And since there was only really one viable shimmer in this palette that I liked, you could tell I was starting to reach for other things. So in this look, I actually used a taupe shade all over the lid and on the lower lash line. And I used Lorelei and Polka Dot to blend it out. So these are the sort of mustardy and orangey shades that I used to sort of warm up a taupe color. So this is a much more neutral look. So if you did have this palette, you can, you know, incorporate other shades to really neutralize it and make it a little bit more everyday wearable. And after experimenting with different palettes, I went back in with the greens. I was like, I missed you greens, let's get back into it. So this is very similar to what I'm wearing today, but I didn't use all the greens. I used the shimmery green all over the lid, so that was the predominant shade, whereas like in my look today, I'm just using it in the sort of inner portion of my eye. In this look, I used it predominantly all over the lid. I used Fire OG, I used Mochi, and I used a little bit of the black. So this doesn't have Leo, which is the darkest green. Instead, it's like the brighter greens with a bit of black on the lash line. And it's a pretty look. It was very striking. I love Goals, which is that shimmery green. It's very, very effective. Then I decided to go back with experimenting outside the palette. I used a bronze shimmer all over the lid, and then I mixed it with Lorelei and Cupcake. This one was a bit of an interesting one. It was showing what the greens are like using a champagne shade. So I used a champagne shimmer all over the lid, and I blended it out with Mochi and Fire OG, and it created a really interesting color. So this is what I would say a more wearable way to use these greens. If you don't want a bold eye look, you can definitely pair them down with a lighter shade. Look number 14, I really liked this look, and it showed that you can use the greens less sort of smoky and intense and more like a wash of color. So what I did with this one, I used Luna, which is the beige color. I swept it on with a brush. Then I put Mochi on with the same brush, just swept it all over the lid and on the lower lash line. So once again, that's that green sort of yellow color. And then I used Goals swept on as well, just over the top to add a little bit more brightness to the look. So this is predominantly Mochi, and I think it's a very, very flattering look. I used a little bit of brown, like a really small brown wing, just to sort of shape the eye. But the brush that I used with this was actually this guy here. I've never used this all over the lid like that, but this is the Sigma Large Fluff Brush. I literally just put the product on and I swept it on my eye like that. I swept it on, I ran it underneath, then I built it up with the next color, and then I just patted a little bit of the shimmer on. So it was a very, very smooth, sort of not precise. It was very, very just a sweeping motion, and I really like the effect. I would totally do it again, and it does show that Mochi is a very flattering sort of yellowy green. I think it's a beautiful color, and I think, yeah, I would definitely recreate this look in the future. All right, the last look is really horrible, and I was like, should I show it? Because it's a piece of shit. But I decided I will show it. But what I realized was 14 was going to be my last look of this video. But then I decided, oh, even though I have paired some of these shades with these shades, I haven't done it so it's distinctly one color and then one color underneath, like one look then underneath the other look. So I decided to do it with the mattes. Doesn't look great. You can see it on the screen. I think if I did this in a more subtle way, like if I predominantly used Mochi and Goals like I did in that sort of sweepy look, I think that would have been really cool with something like Lorelei underneath. So if I did these on the top, that on the bottom, I think it could have been really beautiful. But I sort of accidentally went too dark and I couldn't go back. So you can see that the two sides, the two color stories do complement each other, and they can be incorporated into the same look. It's a bad example of it, but I think in the future I'm definitely going to reach for this palette and try to do, like I said, sort of these kind of colors on the top and maybe those two colors on the bottom, and do it a lot more lighter, because I think you can get some really striking looks pairing the two. So those were all the looks that I created in the month of April using the Gemini palette. Like I said at the start, overall I still love this palette. I think it's too expensive. I think the quality isn't as great as I was expecting for the price, especially since I really didn't like this shade. It was just average. But I think for the unique color story and the way that this half and this half do work well together, I think it's worth it. I still think this is the most unique color in the palette. I love Goals. I probably think Leo and Fire OG are probably a little bit too similar. I would have loved that to be maybe a little bit slightly different, either a different tone, so maybe a little bit more a little bit cooler maybe, or even a little bit deeper. But I love these. I think they're gorgeous. I also really, really love Lorelei. I think these sort of colors just make this palette beautiful, and these sort of side colors are the ones that green palettes these days are skipping out on. They're forgetting that you need these colors to make the other ones work. So anything with this color story, anything with those, I'm down for. I think they work beautifully together, and they create this almost 70s ugly carpet or ugly couch vibe that work beautifully on brown eyes. And that's why, even though I would have liked the formula to be a bit better and I would have liked them to swap this shade out for a better highlight shade, I still think this is a really solid palette, and I still continuously reach for it, and I'm impressed with the looks that I create. Okay, sure. Looking back over the month, there are some standout looks using the greens predominantly. I thought they were the best, or even using that mustard color all over the lid. They were probably my favorite looks. When I started delving into the browns and stuff, it got very boring and generic, but I still feel like the browns are nice to have there, because this one I used a lot in the crease and to blend out looks. This one complemented these really well and was beautiful in its own right. That was also beautiful in its own right and complemented these. Probably these two and this one are like those practical shades that just help you finalize a look and ground a look and add a little bit of dimension. So, you know, that side does look quite boring, but it's also quite practical. But with all the flaws in the palette, I still love it, because the looks I create with that, I still don't think I can get them yet anywhere else quite the same. So yeah, I love the Gemini, and I still do. Often if I love a palette and I've forced myself to use it throughout a whole month over like 15 looks, I end up going, yeah, it's kind of boring and I'm sick of it. I'm still not bored and sick of this. I didn't want to use greens every single day, but I still love it, and I still really have mad props for it. I would love to sit down with Melt and sort of tweak it and create like, not the Gemini remastered, but like the Gemini 2, where it's just got, probably goes a bit more into the greens and the mustards and takes out some of the dodgy shades. But it's such a great jumping off point if you love mustardy greens. So I still love it. All right, this is usually the time where I introduce the palette that I will be focusing on in May. Unfortunately, because I've got so many new palettes that I haven't actually tried, because I want to do first impression reviews on them, I've decided I'm not doing a 1 month, one palette in May. Instead, I'm going to probably do a first impressions over 4 or 5 day video, maybe one a week. So I'm hoping to get at least 4 palettes out of the way in May, and then back in June, I will jump back into a 1 month, one palette, where I take something from my existing collection, not a new palette, and I delve into it. Now, I've got some palettes in mind that I'm thinking of wanting to use in June, but depending on how I feel at the start of June, that might change. So I'm not going to announce which one it is, but in May, I will be, tackling some new palettes, including something like Anastasia Beverly Hills Riviera palette. So I will be sitting down, testing the palette for the first time, and then checking in over 4, 5, 6 days and letting you know the looks I've created and how I feel about the palette after sitting down and using them for that amount of time. So yeah, stay tuned for those. Anyway, if you want to see how I got this look, keep watching. All right, so I've got primer on my eyes. It's just the Bare Minerals primer in, I think, the shade Lit. And I'm just using the shade Luna just to sort of set the crease a little bit. On the same fluffy brush, I'm going in with the shade Mochi, and I think this is probably what makes this palette the most unique. It is this sort of, I don't know, I'm going to say it's a bile green, a bile yellow. It sort of looks like, I don't know, the color of being ill, like just illness in a color, but it works so well to transition these greens, these swampy greens. And I have seen a few sort of swampy green palettes sort of pop up recently, and the only thing they're missing is this sort of greeny, mustardy transition color, because this takes, in my opinion, the greens and actually makes it quite wearable. And this is the hidden gem, I think, of this palette. It's not necessarily the best shade in the palette, but it definitely is the most unique shade in the palette. So I'm talking about that one there. It's like a, yeah, green tone mustard. It's really, really beautiful. I've only put it on lightly, but you can build it up if you wanted to. And comparing it to something that's a little bit more traditional and orange, this is very unique and interesting. All right, I'm just sort of working my way through the greens. So this is just a small amount of Fire OG. I'm putting this once again just in the crease a little bit, and then I'll pack it onto the outside of the lid. So you can see that these shades aren't the best. They're a little bit patchy, but you still get a good effect, but they're not the most, I don't know, they're not the smoothest mattes to apply. All right, putting aside the blending brush for a second, and that is an Esom, what is it? S33. I'm now going in with a Sigma. This is the firm shader brush. So it's sort of like a flatter brush, kind of firm. And I'm picking up, once again, Fire OG just to pat on the lid. I am trying to do this pretty lightly and build up, because you can see that these shades, especially the mattes, they do have a little bit of fallout. So I'm just sort of tapping this on. I'm not, you know, rubbing it in or blending it on. The formula's all right, but they do have a bit of fallout, which does brush away nicely, but I'm trying to minimize it. I'm taking the same brush and the same shade and just running it under the eye, sort of to the same point, sort of the midpoint. Then I've turned the brush over and I'm going in with that green shimmer shade. This is actually a really nice shade. It adds a lot of brightness to the look. And in a predominantly matte palette, I love to see a bit of texture variation, and you can just see that, you know, if this was a matte, it would just make this look a little bit swampy and a little bit dark, but with this shimmer shade, it all of a sudden adds a bit of brightness. Once again, this has a bit of fallout. It's a bit of a chunkier formula, which is a bit annoying, but I'll sweep that away in a second. So you can just see with a big sort of brush, you can just sweep that away. It doesn't actually cling to the skin, which is fine. I don't mind fallout that can be swept away really easily. And then just to use all the greens, I'm going in with the shade Leo, which is just a little bit darker than Fire OG, and I'm just putting that in the outer corner. I find that these shades are quite similar, so you don't really need to use both. All right, just with a fluffy brush that I used to blend out my primer, which is dry now, so it's pretty much a clean brush, I'm just sort of tidying that up a little bit. All right, so that's the greens on the eye. I'm going to go away and put some green liner. This is just from my project pan. I'm going to put this in my waterline. I'm going to put some winged liner. I'm going to come back and decide if I want to add some black. All right, like I said, I've got green on my waterline now. I've got black winged liner. I'm just going to go in with a really small brush and the shade Bonnie, which is the black. And I just want to blend this out a little bit. Sometimes I don't like a really sort of sharp looking liner, especially when I've sort of buggered it up like I have today. So I just like to sometimes use a black just to set the liner a little bit and just to smear it, make it look a little bit more diffused. And I might run a little bit on the lower lash line just to sort of match it up a little bit, make it look a little bit smoky. I think this color is really flattering for brown eyes. I love these greens. I think they're beautiful. They're the sort of greens that they sort of, in some lights, look quite brown. In other lights, they look quite vibrant green. It's really, really pretty. So that's how I like to wear these greens. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.